everybody, I'm Hannah Cruz and this is the Church Musician's Assistant. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and click the notifications bell so you'll be reminded when we put out new videos. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the topic of this video. So, how many of us have ended up having to lead a choir and play the keyboard at the same time, whether it be piano or organ? I bet most of us would raise our hand to that question. Well, how many of us have gotten formal training in conducting a choir from the keyboard? Probably none of us. I don't actually know where you can get that training. I certainly did not get the training, but have had to do this job in practically every church I've ever been at. So there's kind of this weird disconnect of no training for a skill that every church musician seems to need. I want to kind of cover some really basic tips on conducting from the keyboard in this video, but I have to say first that I am in no way an expert on this subject, and I am not a professional conductor either. I hope that these tips are helpful to you all who may be struggling with conducting and playing, or you're just getting into it with a new job or something like that. The first big tip is to teach your choir music literacy and how to sing musically from the very beginning. Okay, because this is going to make your conducting from the keyboard job a lot easier in the end. My philosophy is we should foster thoughtful, independent artists in our choir who, when it comes to the performance, need very minimal instruction from us. They're confident and ready to go, right? So that's the ideal situation. This takes a lot of time and effort on our parts as directors, but I think it's so worth it. Just investing in your singers from the very beginning. So what are some of the practical things that we should be teaching from the beginning? Well, 4 main things in my opinion. The first would be music reading. That's obvious. How to read notation. That's going to help them a lot and prevent you from having to show every little thing in your conducting gestures. The second thing would be voice control and how to sing with an open voice that is clear and strong and confident, how to sing with ease and without restriction. The third would be critical listening and appreciation of music. So maybe you could expose them to a lot of different types of music. Every genre can be valuable in its own way, from folk music to jazz to Bach to an atonal modern piece. All of these pieces of music can be listened to in a critical, appreciative way, and I think if we teach our choirs how to do this, then they'll come into the singing experience with a lot more confidence and joy. Then fourth, teach teamwork. Teach your choir how to listen across the room, how to listen to each other and become one important voice among many, where the choir is one sound and everyone is working together fluidly. Okay, so if we can invest in teaching these things from the beginning, it's going to make our job as conductor from the keyboard much simpler in the end. Big tip number 2, reduce your conducting gestures from the keyboard to only the most necessary. Conductors oftentimes is trying to show many different things at once, from musicality to practical things like entrances and exits. And sometimes the process of conducting feels very complicated if you're trying to mimic that sort of work. But when it comes to conducting from the keyboard, it's best if we simplify it down to the bare bones of what the choir really needs. So what does the choir actually need to see from you? Well, number one would be entrances and exits, because even if you taught them how to read music and they're really confident, people still get lost. I do too sometimes. Maybe their eye jumps from one line and like skips the next line by accident, or they just get nervous and get lost. I mean, there's lots of reasons why someone would kind of lose their place. So if we can constantly give strong entrances and show them where to cut off as well and keep those consonants really unified, I think that's super helpful. The next thing that's necessary, in my opinion, is showing rests and lulls in the pulse. So trying to show, because we're not doing this bit, all the time from the keyboard, if we can show the pulse, especially during long held notes where people might be likely to stop counting, that's critical in my opinion. Singers especially are known for poor rhythm, basically, and they get so caught up in their melodies that they forget to count, right? Now, when they're singing fast quarter notes or eighth notes, it's easier to sing those with a steady pulse. But if you're singing a whole note or you're kind of counting through rests, then it becomes more difficult. So providing that instruction from the keyboard is important. And then a few more things are necessary, in my opinion, to show dramatic changes in the music. That might be anything from a change in tempo, a change in dynamic, or mood. There's all sorts of different changes that might occur that we need to show somehow. Also, wanting to show the general mood through our body language and through our facial expressions. And finally, show a personal connection. Smile when it's necessary to smile for the mood, and make eye contact with your singers as often as possible. That's a tip for regular conductors as well. Just not to get buried in the music, not to get buried into your conducting technique, but really foster that personal connection, the intimacy, and boost that sense of teamwork by making eye contact. Okay, big tip number 3. The rest of the tips go fairly quickly here. So number 3 is to use your head, basically from your shoulders up, like a baton. Treat it as though there's an ictus. It can only go so high and it can only go so low, and the height of your piano might affect that too. Like if your head bobs down below a certain point, people might not be able to see you. So do some experimentation and figure out what's the highest you can go and what's the lowest you can go. And use your head as though it's, an arm or a baton. And then try to use your hands and your arms sparingly. Just limit that movement. Of course, you're going to be limited just because you're playing the keyboard. So you may never have an opportunity to use your hands to show gestures for the choir, but there are some moments when you might have a break from the keyboard and you could possibly raise one arm for a moment to show something, but save those places for or save those gestures for really, I guess, important moments, and when it's physically possible for you as the keyboardist. Okay, big tip number 4: rely on facial expressions and body language and breathing as much as or more than gestures, conducting gestures. So the way your face appears and what mood you're giving off, your body language and how slumped it is, or strong it is, or relaxed, or tense, all of those things are going to affect how they sing for you. and breathing as well. So when you breathe and you show in your face that you're breathing, they will breathe with you. If your eyebrows are raised, they will probably raise their eyebrows. But if your eyebrows are furrowed, then they may furrow their eyebrows, and all of those things affect the mood and the way that they will sing. So think about all that when you're working through a piece of music. Try to distill, what mood is this section of the music right now? And if I were in that mood, how would my body reflect the mood? And then see if you can show that while you are playing. Big tip number 5. And okay, this flows from the fact that we've been talking about all this body movement. I encourage you to monitor your body tension throughout rehearsal, because I often notice that after rehearsal I get really tense, especially in this area of my neck and upper back, and then that radiates sometimes even through my shoulders, through the forearms, and that can create pain in your wrists and fingers and even injury. So if you notice this is happening, then figure out ways to play the keyboard and conduct with less tension. And I know that's easier said than done. One basic tip that I would say would be to drop the weight of your arms into the keys, and that's just good piano practice basically, or keyboard practice. But I won't go too much into depth about that. You may want to consider stretches and targeted strength training exercises as well if it gets to a pretty bad point. So just monitor your body tension, because it can be very physically taxing. Now finally, tip number 6. In this tip, I just want to talk about executing all of this choreography, which can feel overwhelming, especially if the keyboard accompaniment is quite challenging. So just a word on executing all of these things successfully and with minimal stress. I suggest practicing the accompaniment while also adding in those conducting gestures, so that it feels like one thing and one performance, rather than separating your practice into conducting gestures and keyboard playing. So just bring those all into the same practice session. And then the second thing I would say is develop a really clear marking system on your sheet music. Not too complicated, just, markings for entrances and exits, which may be easy for you to miss as you're playing through. And maybe some gestures relating to mood, or open up your body stance. You could use colors, different colored pencils. I don't personally. I try to keep the markings to a minimum, but let them be large and clear and actually helpful while I'm playing the piece. And I won't go too much into that because I have my own way of doing it, but I think everyone comes up with something that works best for them. I could go into that more in a different video. I could go into any of these things more if you guys like. So my question for you now is, would you like to learn more about conducting from the keyboard? Would you like to hear more about any of these tips that I've mentioned today? If so, please comment below and just give me a little bit of detail on what you'd like to hear about. I appreciate that. And also, from your years of experience as a keyboardist and conductor, what do you think would be a great tip to tell someone new to conducting from the keyboard? So thank you for your comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video if you've enjoyed it before you go. All the best in your conducting and playing this season. As always, blessings until next time.